Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Gorell, and thank you for participating in today's 1143rd Justice Clearinghouse webinar, Empathetic Leadership, Building a Culture of Trust. Empathetic leadership is the key to building organizations that are productive, resilient, and cohesive. And during our webinar today, Catherine Manning is back with us to discuss why empathetic leadership is so important, and we'll talk about the practical steps we can take to build a culture of empathy through real shifts in our leadership, colleagues, and ourselves. Through commitment and dedication, we can build a culture of empathy for a stronger organization, more productive teams, and a more engaged and healthier workforce. Kate Manning is the president of Blackbird LLC, which provides training and consultation on issues of trauma and victimization. In her 15 years with the Department of Justice, Ms. Manning has served as a senior attorney advisor at the Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys, advising the department on its response to victims in cases involving terrorism, sexual assault, child exploitation, large-scale fraud, crimes in Indian country, and more. Ms. Manning has also worked as a counselor and advocate for battered women in the Family Violence and Sex Crimes Unit of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. And now briefly, before we begin, I'd like to share with you some information about Justice Clearinghouse. The Justice Clearinghouse is the only peer-to-peer multidisciplinary educational program for justice professionals that offers the instruction and skills necessary to achieve both individual and organizational transformation. Through our year-round virtual conference, our audience and members develop those crucial skills that are necessary to positively impact themselves and their communities. And while anyone can attend our live events, our paid members are able to access this content on their own schedule with over 1,100 hours of recorded sessions, and are also eligible to receive certificates of attendance that may be used when seeking continuing education credits. So if you're not presently a member, I would invite you to join today and support our work. Now, the last couple of things I'd like to address with everyone is some basic housekeeping items. First, this event is being recorded and the formal presentation is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. It will be available to members on the Justice Clearinghouse website. Second, given the number of people that we're expecting to attend this webinar, there is a possibility, although I think it is slight, that we'll start having technology issues. In the worst case scenario, we'll shut down the webinar, restart it, get Kate joined back in, and we would ask that you click on the same registration link or the same attendee link as before to join us. Now, this is a listen-only event, but you can type in any questions you have through the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll take as many of your questions as possible at the end of the formal presentation. And by the way, Kate's also going to be asking some open-ended questions, and you can respond to those questions through your toolbar. Now, we have incorporated a couple of polling questions into this webinar, and you'll need to have access to your mouse to participate. I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll, which is, how long have you been in your current role or profession in the criminal justice community? You can see our 4 options. And while you guys are selecting which applies to you, I did want to point out that in the handouts section of the toolbar, you'll find a PDF with information on an online course that we developed with Kate directly related to this webinar called Trauma in the Workplace. It's a phenomenal course. I'd encourage all of you to take a look at it. I'll go ahead and close down the poll. I'll share those results. 41% of you have more than 15 years, 23% 8 to 15 years, 15% 4 to 7 years, and 22% 0 to 3 years. Thank you so much. Now, after today's webinar, there will be a follow-up survey, and we ask that you complete it. Your feedback is shared with our presenters and helps shape everything we do here at Justice Clearinghouse. With that, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to our instructor for the day. Kate, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Aaron, and wonderful to see you all. I'm glad to see some friendly faces, folks I know in the audience, and really pleased to meet those of you who are new. I'm actually going to go on camera for just a second so you can lay eyes on me. Hello. I wanted to start off this presentation with a quick story. We're going to go in the Wayback Machine. I'm going to tell a story about something that happened many years ago. In December of 1985, 248 members of the 101st Airborne Division boarded a military transport plane in Gander, Newfoundland. That plane crashed shortly after takeoff, and everyone on board perished in that crash. The military, after the crash, the military commissioned an investigation and report. And what they wanted to know was what factors led to better or worse outcomes among the affected units in terms of mission readiness and unit cohesion. And after that full investigation and report were issued, what they ultimately came up with was there was one factor that really was the most crucial in terms of both of those factors, unit cohesion and mission readiness. And that factor was leadership. Specifically, leaders who were able to show compassion and care toward those who were affected by this horrible tragedy, who were able to lead in a way that inspired hope, and crucially, who were able to model healthy responses to horrific events. Now, 1985 was a very long time ago, but I would say that here in 2023, we have certainly had our share of tragedy as well. We've faced everything from COVID to George Floyd to anti-Asian hate, Uvalde, Buffalo, political upheaval, economic uncertainty, and on and on and on. The way that we support each other through these times is going to have a long-lasting impact, not just on individual employees and our relationships with them, but on our ability to succeed as an organization as a whole. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is share with you my best advice on how to lead with empathy, because what we're seeing again and again is that's really the difference. Leaders who are able to show empathy through hard times are the ones that are going to inspire loyalty. They are going to get more engagement and creativity. They're going to have more success on pretty much every outcome. So I'm going to turn off my camera now and just focus on the slides for a second here. We're going to start off with some statistics. And the reason I start with that, I have to warn you, it's going to be a little bit doom and gloom here at the beginning, which I do not because I want to be depressing, but because I think it's really important for us to understand the reality of what we are facing right now. Because of all of this turmoil that we've faced here in the 2020s, we have seen skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression. All of those issues are affecting us for sure individually in our homes, but they're also affecting us at work. And so what I wanted to share with you is first is just a few statistics on how these issues are showing up at work. And I'm not going to read this all to you, but what I would love is if you could just take a second, read through these statistics and drop in the chat if any of these stands out to you, if it's something that you find surprising, for instance, or something that you find not at all surprising that really resonates with you. So just take a second, and I would love to see any comments in the chat there. And I should say, I know a number of people are saying hello and chiming in the questions, the questions portion. Try to include your chat, those kinds of responses in the chat so that we can preserve the questions for me to answer at the end. I'm going to save about 15 minutes at the end there to answer questions. So yeah, I'm seeing people saying 100% accurate, absolutely emotionally detached. Thank you. Thank you all for chiming in there. Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, not surprised. I know, I think a lot of these are statistics where we think, you know, maybe I didn't know that number, but yep, that sounds exactly right. I will say a couple of them that stand out for me. First, in that third bullet point down where it starts off saying 50% of US workers are feeling stressed every day. The part that really stands out to me is actually that last part, 18% are angry at work every single day. Isn't that awful to think about, that people are feeling angry every single day? You know, I work here in my home office. I'm not going into an office every day, but I'm certainly seeing that anger all around me. I see it at the grocery store. I see it in traffic. I see it, sometimes even up at the kids' school. I'm guessing that probably you all are seeing a lot of anger too. I did a training last year for some California state employees who investigate complaints of bias and harassment in employment. And they said that they were seeing levels of anger like they had never seen before. One woman said to me, I've been doing this job for 20 years and had never received a death threat. And in the last year, I've received 3. So I'm curious if you all are also seeing that more anger right now than you've seen in the past. I feel like there's something that's happening right now, like people were kind of holding it together through the pandemic. If you remember, right, when in 2020, when things first started shutting down, there was this sense of just hang on, we just have to get through these next few months and then everything will go back to normal. And then it got pushed out a few more months and a few more months and a few more months. And I think what happened is people are just so worn down by that it's like we have nothing left to give. And so tempers are really, really short right now. The other one of these statistics that stands out to me is this final one. And this one I actually find in some ways almost hopeful. So where it says that 1 in 5 workers were planning to quit in 2022 and that more than 2/3 say they're seeking more fulfillment at work. I actually think that maybe that's a good thing. Because what that says to me is perhaps through this time period that has been so difficult, maybe we've had some epiphanies, some awakenings, some real aha moments about what we are willing to put up with at work, what our priorities are, what really matters to us. I think that we have seen a lot of people shifting jobs. But the thing that is particularly, I think, positive about this is the fact that you all are here to learn about empathetic leadership. And look at this, more than 2/3 said they're seeking more fulfillment at work. If we can get good at this, if we can be the type of leaders that people want, that people feel like actually care about them as human beings, not just for what they can produce this week, we have the ability to shift the culture of our organization, our team, so that they're the type of teams that not only keep people there, that people don't want to leave, but also attract new people. So I'm hopeful that maybe through this shift, through this focus on empathetic leadership, we can start to build new types of organizations. And my friends, I've got to say, there is perhaps nowhere where that is more important than in some of the fields where you all work. So I'm just going to share again a few statistics and statements that I've been hearing. And again, I would love to hear in the chat if these are things that resonate for you. Is this in line with what you're seeing and hearing? Maybe in line with what you're feeling? This last one was from the FOP president, Patrick Yo, saying, I want to signal a crisis. And what he meant was in terms of turnover in law enforcement. And, that's where we started as well, was 44% increase in retirements, 18% increase in resignations. Is that what you're seeing as well? You seeing that kind of turnover? Yeah, I'm saying, yeah, absolutely. Boy, yeah, thank you. Thank you all for sharing these. So if you want more on this, gosh, so many great comments here. Thank you all for participating. If you want more on this, if you see down at the bottom, you will see my citations for those. So if you want to take a look at any of those, and on this, I don't want to go all the way back through, but the previous one was from the Gallup 2022 State of the Workplace poll. So that these were statistics from just last year. All right, so I think this is one of the things we have to recognize is we are in a difficult time in the world, but in particular in a difficult time in our field. And one of the things that I think we have to reckon with is exemplified by this quote. I'm going to give you a second to read it. We are dealing with some really, really horrific things. day in and day out. You know, I was at the Justice Department for about 15 years, the US Justice Department, and I worked on victim issues there. And some of the stories that I heard, I mean, I still carry them with me today. I remember one day I opened up my email and I burst into tears. You know, just the statement, it was a fact scenario in the email. Somebody was asking for advice. How do I handle this? And it was so awful that I started to cry sitting there at my desk. I'm betting that a lot of you have similar stories and have faced similar issues. And this is where the role of leadership becomes so important, because where we are asking people to deal with these kinds of issues day in and day out, if we are not supporting them in their work with people who are going through some of the most horrific life circumstances we can imagine, they are never going to be able to perform in the way that they need to do a good job, and they're certainly not going to be able to continue doing it over the long term. So just a few more statistics here, and then I promise I'll stop with them. So these are particularly on empathy and why empathy matters so much. So these statistics are interesting to me. They're not actually from a criminal justice or law enforcement kind of background. They're actually from just business, you know, general leadership. So I would imagine that actually it's even more important in our field than it is in, you know, general kind of business workplaces. But what they found is that empathy in leadership is actually by far the most important leadership trait on every kind of measure that they looked at in terms of output, creativity, engagement, people being loyal to the leader. For every single one, empathy was the factor that made the biggest difference. 80% of their employees said they'd be willing to leave their job if they found a more empathetic employer, and 57% would take a pay cut to do so. The ones here from the third and fourth bullet, this is a study that just came out this week, that managers have more of an impact on our mental health than doctors or even therapists, as much as our spouses or partners. It's a lot, right? That's quite a lot to be holding on to. And when we have empathetic leaders, we are more connected to each other, we're more creative, and we're more loyal. Turnover is much lower when we feel like our leader is empathetic. So we've been talking a lot here about what is empathetic leadership, but I want to give just a second to really define this term. And what I would love for just a second, I want you to think of somebody that you believe is an empathetic leader. And it could be a boss that you've had, maybe somebody who is a supervisor to you now or was in the past. It could be maybe a family member, maybe somebody in your community. It could be somebody in your faith community. Think about somebody that you would consider to be an empathetic leader. And then what I would love is to see in the chat, could you list a characteristic of that person? Just describe them in some way. Okay, like give an adjective to what that person is like. I'll give a few minutes for that. Humility, great, thank you, Lori. Present, perfect. Engaged, listener, love that. Unbiased, I love that, Dr. Evelyn. Patient, good listener, yeah, excellent. Open and welcoming, I love these. Self-aware, caring, consistent, really good one. Transparent, approachable, oh, these are excellent. Yeah, you all are doing it in the question part. I don't actually know where the chat is. Aaron, are they able to see the chat? Openness, humanity, compassion.
So they're able to type in any questions to you, and we're able to respond to them. But chat is actually something that only the presenters have.
Oh, okay. So they actually should be in the Q&A. Perfect. Good.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, respectful, helpful, compassionate, approachable. Jeremy, I love your current commander. Fantastic. Kind, patient, trusting. These are all excellent, you all. Fantastic. Oh, good. And Rana, too, your supervisor. Genuine. These are fantastic. And I've got to tell you that a lot of them are things we're going to be touching on. I'm going to just give you a quick definition. This is from my friend Rob Volpe. And what I love about it is it focuses on the idea that as a leader, what makes you an empathetic leader is understanding that you are interacting with actual human beings, right? These are not just tools to achieve some task. These are real human beings, and they have their own point of views, right? They have issues that they are dealing with that maybe we are not privy to. So we understand the humanity of the person in front of us, and we use that in our decision making, our communication, our collaboration, our problem solving, and other skills. So we're making sure that we both understand the humanity of the people we're interacting with, and we are taking that into consideration in our actions. Now, one thing I want to point out about this, nowhere in this definition, and actually nowhere in any of your answers, your incredible answers, is a job title. Nowhere does it say an empathetic leader is somebody who has the role of director, right? Commander, chief. An empathetic leader can be anybody, because the reality is we all lead from where we sit by the ways that we show up in the world and for each other. I'm sure many of you can think of somebody who may not have been a supervisor or somebody who was very high up in the organization, and yet had an outsized impact on the culture of the organization. Maybe it was the mailroom guy who, as he walked around, smiled at everybody and just made everybody feel good. There used to be a guy like that at a place I worked. I certainly have known many, many victim advocates who really were just the life and soul of their office, even though they didn't have the word director after their name. So I just want to emphasize that for all of you, that empathetic leadership is all of our responsibility, not just people who are in a role where they are managing others. All right, so what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about why empathetic leadership is so important. And for that, I'm going to go through pretty quickly a little bit of an overview of a few psychological terms that I think are particularly relevant to why empathetic leadership is so important, especially right now. And for that, I'm going to talk about institutional betrayal and psychological safety. So first off, institutional betrayal. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. You can, again, drop that in the Q&A if you've heard of that before or if you haven't. Institutional betrayal is a psychological concept that comes out of the work of Dr. Jennifer Freyd. That's F-R-E-Y-D. She is a psychologist at the University of Oregon. The way that this concept was explained to me was with a series of hypotheticals. So that's how I'm going to explain it to you as well. I find it to be the easiest way to understand it. So first, I want you to imagine a child who's been abused by a parent. Now, there might be physical injury from the abuse, like bruising, for instance, but then on top of that, there will be a psychological injury from the fact that the child was injured by someone that he looked to for support and protection. Now, that physical injury, is more likely to end more quickly than the psychological one, right? So the psychological injury will last far longer than that physical one. Long after those bruises have faded, that psychological injury will remain. Next, I want you to imagine a college student who is sexually assaulted on campus, and she goes to her campus Title IX coordinator for support and to report this incident. And instead of being supportive, the Title IX coordinator maybe minimizes what she went through or implies that it was her fault. Now, there will be an underlying injury from the assault, but now on top of that, we have a second injury on top of the first, because this institution that she went to for support and protection has instead created this second injury. They have betrayed her trust. And so that institutional betrayal is a second injury. And that second injury can, as Dr. Freyd's research has shown, can actually last longer than the underlying injury. So even after the person has maybe been able to recover from the underlying injury, that institutional betrayal can continue to cause harm for that individual. So this is particularly important for people who are involved in organizations where, for instance, there is a very tight sense of identity and camaraderie within the institution. for instance, those in the military. So Dr. Fried has also studied what happens in the military with respect to sexual assault. And she has found when they've looked at women who were sexually assaulted at about the same age, some of whom were current members of the military and some of whom were veterans, they found that the negative effects of the sexual assault lasted longer for the people who were currently members of the service. So people who had already separated from service were able to recover more quickly. Isn't that amazing? Same age, and both of them had a history with the military, but those who were currently serving had worse effects. And the conclusion was that it was because there was this sense of, I am part of this larger institution that is supposed to protect me, and it failed to. I've got to say, I think this is also important for those who are working for the government, whether you're working for a state government, a county, city government, or the federal government. When you think about your interactions with members of the public, for instance, if somebody comes to you and reports a crime, they have that underlying injury of the crime, and they are looking to you for support and protection. If they feel that you are failing to protect them, right, that creates the potential for institutional betrayal. Now, one caveat to that, I want to just be clear, institutional betrayal doesn't mean you've never done, we have to do everything that the person wants. Institutional betrayal comes to how you are treated in that interaction. And so let's bring it back to an individual workplace. Imagine that you are experiencing bias in the workplace and you go to your supervisor to report that bias, and they are minimizing, they imply it's your fault, that you're making it up, that you have some ulterior motive. That can be a second injury on top of the first. And again, you now have both that injury from the bias, but a second injury on top because of the institution's response. If instead the supervisor says, thank you so much for reporting this to me. Let me explain to you how these complaints are handled. And then they conduct a full and fair investigation. I'm sure those of you who are prosecutors have seen this before. More important than the outcome is the way that you are treated through the process. So if you are treated with fairness throughout and understanding and clarity, that's the way to avoid institutional betrayal. It's when we are failing to live up to what we have promised that we are in danger of creating institutional betrayal. All right, so that was one side of the coin, institutional betrayal. What I want to do is give the flip side, and this is kind of the more positive. Psychological safety. This is a term that is known a little bit more, and it's a term that I first came across a few years ago when I was reading about a study that Google did. So Google wanted to find out what made for successful teams, and I think what they were hoping for is just a formula that said, okay, you need one engineer, one good manager, one good communicator, one, and that's what they wanted, was just give us the recipe and then we'll just rinse and repeat going forward. They didn't find that. They looked at hundreds and hundreds of different teams, and teams that were made up in all sorts of different ways. So they looked at teams where everybody had a similar background and everybody had a different background. They looked at teams that were all men and all women. They looked at teams where there was one strong leader, no strong leaders, a lot of strong leaders. And they couldn't find any through line that explained why some teams were more successful than others until they hit upon this idea of psychological safety. Psychological safety is the sense that within this team, it is okay to admit that I don't know the answer, or that I think I made a mistake, or that I'm having a hard time right now. And teams where there is psychological safety outperformed on every single measure they looked at. They outperformed all other teams. And that has continued to be the case as this study has been repeated. So psychological safety is really, really key in terms of success on a team, engagement, productivity, creativity, even ethical behavior. All of it is enhanced by psychological safety. Now, here's the thing that I also find really, really fascinating. The fastest way to build psychological safety on a team is to support one another through a difficult time. Isn't that amazing? You know, in the study I read that Google did, they talked about a manager who was fairly new on the team, and the team was not really gelling. Things were not going well. People didn't really trust each other. And then they did this offsite, and he, at the offsite, was very open about his background, his concerns. And one of the things he was open with them about is that he had recently received a cancer diagnosis. When he opened up about that, it caused other team members to open up about some of their own challenges. And through that conversation, they really learned how to trust each other. And that team was able to really gel and go through numerous challenges afterward because they had built up this bedrock trust. And I imagine this makes intuitive sense to you. If you think back on a time in your own life where you were struggling, maybe you had suffered some kind of setback, maybe you lost something that was really important to you, maybe you lost someone who was really important to you, and you were in one of those times where you thought, I don't know how I'm going to make it through this week. Maybe I don't know how I'm going to make it through this night. And now think about the people who were there for you then. Okay, just in your head, just picture who you were able to count on in that moment. I am willing to bet that even if you haven't heard from that person in a decade, if they texted you right now, you would pick up the phone and call them and say, how can I help you? Because the reality is when we are supported through our hard times, we want to support others as well. And that is the key here, right? When we talk about empathetic leadership, what I'm talking about is showing up for people in their hard times, because that is what builds that strong bedrock of trust that is going to see you through this hard time and all the other hard times that unfortunately we know are coming down the pike. All right, so I'm going to pause here. We're going to do a poll because I want to just make sure that people are understanding these concepts. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. But also, I would love to hear just, is this resonating with you? Can you think about a time where you have experienced institutional betrayal or psychological safety?
Wow. Kate, the poll is open. We've got about half the audience has already responded, so we'll give folks about another 10 seconds to respond. You probably won't be surprised by these results, but I know I am. Folks will give you about another 5 seconds so we can get back to Kate. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. I'll share the results. So Kate, 62% experienced both.
Wow.
18% institutional, 12% psychological, and only 8% said neither.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing, huh? Incredible to think how much these concepts are clear to people, right? I feel like often when I've said the term institutional betrayal to people, they'll say, I've never heard of it, but I know exactly what you mean because I've lived it. And the same with psychological safety. And I imagine, I hope that a lot of you are in teams right now where there is psychological safety, and I hope that you are one of the ones helping to build that psychological safety. I'm going to go now and talk through this for the rest of our conversation is going to be very practical advice on how to be a more empathetic leader. I love takeaways. I love really quick, easy things to remember because I am very busy and I know you are too. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to be giving you just little tips like, hey, think about doing this. And so I would recommend as I'm going, have something to write some notes on because a lot of what I'm saying will be things that you think, oh, yeah, of course, I should definitely do that. But in a week, a month, 2 months, 6 months, it'll slip your mind. So write yourself a few notes and keep them somewhere just as a little reminder so that you can keep coming back to this because it is, as we've talked about, really, really important, especially right now. So when I think about what makes an empathetic leader, I really think about it in terms of the people that we are interacting with. How are we being received? And to me, there's three main components. One is this sense of I I will be seen, I will be heard, I am valued as a human, and I call that acknowledgement, okay? The second one is I can get help when I need it. You know, if I am struggling, I know that you are a person who can help me, who will try to help me, and I call that one support. And then the third one is I know that I will be treated fairly here, right? So this idea that the things that you are saying are not just, you know, you're not just paper thin, they're not just things you're saying to make me feel good. I know that I can trust you. And that's really the third component. So I'm going to walk through each of these. And again, within each of these three categories, I'm going to flesh them out a little bit and give you some practical advice on how to make that real in your teams. And then again, remember, we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. So, so please drop questions in the chat right now, and also feel free to hold on to them for the end too. I will also at the end give you some ways to contact me in case there's anything that comes up that you maybe don't want to ask in front of everybody. All right, so let's start off with acknowledgement. And again, that's the sense of I will be heard. Now, I think probably everybody on this call thinks, oh yeah, listening is important and I know how to listen. Yeah, I'm good at listening. But the reality is most of us are nowhere near as good at listening as we think we are. When we talk about listening, what I mean is active listening. So that's not just allowing the person to speak, it's creating the circumstances where the person feels comfortable opening up. And so there's a few things we can do for that. One is ask open-ended questions, reflect back, make sure we're paying attention to them, you know, actually give eye contact. And then also acknowledge. Acknowledge means letting them know you heard them by saying something like, thanks for letting me know that. I'm sorry for everything you're going through. Now, here's the thing. You know, I know the majority of you have been in your roles for a long time, and I know that in that time you have built up some incredible skills that make you very, very valuable in your workplaces. But I guess, that there is one thing that you have gotten worse at the more senior that you are, and that is listening. And here's why. How do you get more senior? You get more senior by being really good at your job. And often you get more senior by being really good at solving problems, by being able to identify this is an issue and come up with a solution to it very, very quickly. When you are the person who can do that, I mean, your supervisor loves you, right? I mean, those are the things that lead to, you know, awards and promotions and raises and all that great stuff. And so over time, we learn what makes me valuable is that I can solve problems, and we start to do it instinctively. And so somebody will come to you and start to share something with you. You know, maybe they're saying, my wife is sick, right? They come to you and they say, I've just gotten a diagnosis that my wife is sick. Now, in your supervisor, your managerial, your senior leader kind of role, you are instantly starting to think about problem solving and reframing, right? So here's who you need to talk to. I'm sure it's all going to work out for the best. We're going to make sure that you have all the time you need. All of those things may be good. You know, maybe those are great things for down the line, but in that first moment, that's not what they need to hear. What they need to hear first is, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then the next thing to say is, how can I help? So don't leap. This is my caution to you, particularly again, for those of you who are more senior, do not leap to problem solving. Give it a minute, listen, and then ask, how can I help? And then listen to that as well. I will tell you, I know Erin mentioned, if you go down to the handouts, there is a little link. I did a whole training on how to respond to these kinds of conversations when somebody comes to you at work and they're struggling. So I did a whole long training on that. And if you are interested in working on these issues, you'll see the handout there. You can click through and learn more about that there. Okay, so that's the first thing, get better at listening, making sure that we are actually listening. But the other thing is making sure that we're not only listening to the people who come to us, we are actually checking in on the people around us. There was an interesting study that they did that Human did. They're a great organization that does a lot of studies about workplaces, and they found that psychological safety is highest for employees who check in with their manager at least once a week, but that only 29% of them did check in with their manager every week. I'm curious, I would love to see in the chat if you are checking in with your manager or with your team members at least once a week. I'm going to give you just a little bit of advice on how to do this. One, I say make a list, and you may think that's kind of silly if you think there's only 4 of them. I'm pretty sure I can keep track of them, Kate. But here's why I say you should make a list. There are, I am sure, some members of your team that you get along with better than others, and this could be because you have a similar background, or they're funny, or any number of reasons, right? There are people that you just connect with a little bit better. I am willing to bet that you check in with them more than with other team members. And so you make the list because it keeps you honest. The reality is that the people that you don't connect with quite as much are probably the ones that other people are not connecting with quite as much either. And they might be the ones most in need of that check-in. So that's why I say make a list. Put it on your calendar. I've got to say, I'm a queen of calendars, and I know that not everybody is. So I want to make sure that I'm not being unfair about this, but I do find it easier if you do something to make sure that you are actually doing this. So maybe you say, okay, I'm going to spend Friday afternoons are going to be my check-in time, or every day after lunch, I'm going to do a quick email and check in on people. Just think about, is there some way that you can keep yourself honest and make sure you're doing it? In terms of how to do it, make sure that it's not only work related. That's really all I want to say on that. Ask about things in their lives. If you know they're really into football or mysteries, like I'm really into British mysteries. I'm always happy to talk about books. So ask about something that they're interested in. Show that you care about them beyond what they are doing at work. Getting away gracefully, I have 2 pieces of advice on this. One is, this is that situation where you really didn't intend to have a whole long conversation about last Sunday's football game. You really just wanted to do a quick check-in, and the person keeps going on and on and on. Sometimes that happens, right? So 2 pieces of advice on that. One is interrupt yourself, not them. So maybe they're talking on and on about the football game, and you say, man, that must have been such a, oh my gosh, I just realized what time it is. I've got to go, but it was really nice talking with you. Okay, so that's piece of advice number 1, interrupt yourself, not them. The second one is have an easy exit line. And this is something I learned from my former boss at DOJ. His exit line was, keep up the good work. And so I would be chatting with him, and then he would say, well, keep up the good work, Kate. And I would be like, oh, I guess the conversation is over now. And I would leave, and I wasn't insulted by that. So see if you can come up with an easy exit line. And then the final thing is, know that there are sometimes going to be conversations where what you need is more than a quick check-in. If you start to have the quick check-in and you're thinking this is going to be a 10-minute conversation, and then I've got a report to get out, a meeting to go to or something, but somebody brings up something really heavy, it may be worthwhile to push back that meeting, to let the report linger for a little bit longer, because the reality is when there's somebody who has come to you and they're dealing with something really difficult, that is going to mean more than all of the other things on our to-do list. So be willing in those moments to put aside your daily checklist and really focus on the person in front of you. All right, the next one is express gratitude. Another study that was fascinating to me found that people are less likely to express gratitude at work than anywhere else in their lives. Isn't that interesting? When I think about all the things that we do for each other at work all day long, 60% of people said they never express gratitude at work, like they just never say thank you. I found that so appalling, and so this is why I'm doing another poll here. I would love to see, how often are you getting thanked? How often does your supervisor thank you? Is it something that's happening commonly? I would love to hear, but we don't have a poll. I'd love to hear how often you're thanking others too.
Great question, Kate. We've got about half of the audience that have voted. We'll give this one about another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll share the results. I'm actually kind of pleasantly surprised by the results that I'm seeing here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. I'll share the results with everyone. 36% indicated at least once per week. 29% said at least once a month. 21% said a few times a year, and 14% said I can't remember the last time. Back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all for that. I'm glad to hear the majority of you are receiving that thank you regularly. Think about it for your own actions as well. This is another thing that might be worthwhile, having a list or a calendar or something like that. When we express gratitude to others, it's incredible the impact it can have. I actually heard an interview with Indra Nooyi, who used to be the CEO of Pepsi, the Pepsi company. And she said one of the best things she ever did as a manager is when she became the CEO, she wrote thank you notes at the end of the year. She wrote a thank you note for each of her 200 top managers, but she didn't write it to them. She wrote it to their parents. And in the thank you note, she talked in real specific detail about why she was so grateful for this person's efforts within the company. She said there were people who were making copies of it and handing them out to all the neighbors. This is my son, the CEO of Pepsi really values him. People had it framed. She said it was the most impactful thing she had ever done. And think about that. I mean, even if you just did it once a year as an end of the year thank you note, think about how much impact that can have on people. And also, frankly, it has an impact on us as well. When people express gratitude, it helps us shift our mindset. We focus on the things that we're grateful for, the really good things in our lives. I actually have a practice where if I'm having one of those days where I just feel so sorry for myself, like everything's awful, poor me, I force myself to write a thank you note to somebody, because it makes me focus on, you know what, I actually have a whole lot of blessings in my life, so much to be thankful for, and it really gives me a lift too. All right, the elephant in the room. What I mean by that is sometimes there is something going on in the world or in our community or in our team that is really, really difficult and that nobody wants to talk about because they're scared to. I will tell you that those kinds of conversations can be difficult, but also if you're not willing to have them, they can really poison your team. So I don't know if I can share this in the Q&A. I'm gonna try to share with you. I wrote a whole article on this. Maybe Aaron, if people can't see what I'm typing, will you put it in the Q&A for them? I wrote a whole article on how to do this well, but it's really important, I think, first and foremost, that we be brave enough to have those conversations. So, for instance, I actually taught a class the day after the Uvalde shooting, and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I could barely hold it together, and I thought, maybe if I just really stick to my outline and really power through, I can get through this without crying. And then I thought, that's not the way I want to show up in this space right now. So instead, I started off by saying, this horrible thing happened yesterday, and I wanted to give a little bit of space for people to talk about it. We'll spend about 15 minutes. If you don't want to participate, you don't have to. Feel free to just come back in 15 minutes. We were remote at the time. So just come back. You can turn off your camera. You can share what you want to or not. And then, so all of that was welcome. Setting the idea, this is what we're talking about, then the ground rules of what we're going to talk about. You don't have to have your camera on. It's going to be about 15 minutes. And then if you are the one leading the discussion, you have to go first. And with that, it's modeling vulnerability, showing that it's okay to talk about the hard things. So what I said was, this was the truth. I said, yesterday I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw the images of those beautiful children and I sank to my knees and I started to sob. And then I asked a question. I said, I'm sure that a lot of you have also had your own emotional responses, and I just wanted to create some room for that. So does anybody want to talk about how they're feeling today? So open-ended question. And then every person who speaks gets acknowledged. So one person might say, I've just turned it off. I can't watch it at all. Yeah, I totally hear that. I get that. Another person might say, it's all I can think about. Yeah, that makes sense to me too. I will tell you, I try to do that even in the Q&A here. I'm trying to acknowledge. There's so many there's so many of you and you're doing such a great job participating, but I try as much as possible, even in trainings, to acknowledge everything that everybody is saying. And then finally, you want to make sure you end the conversation well. So thank everybody for participating, for sharing their thoughts, and then you can transition. So if you want more on that, I did share that article. Hopefully you're able to read it. But remember, the key here is be willing to have those hard conversations, because if there is something going on in the world, if a quarter of the team has left in the last year and nobody is talking about that, there's clearly a problem. We have to create avenues for people to discuss the things that are actually going on. All right, I'm going to move on to the next pillar of empathetic leadership, and that's support. And remember, that's the idea that when I am struggling, I can get help. So some of that is actual tangible help. Like, do we have policies that are supportive of people? There have been some incredible new types of resources available, everything from miscarriage leave, I saw some organizations have, to mental health days, to culturally specific mental health resources and therapists, just some amazing things that are out there. So do what you can to either implement or advocate for supportive policies for people who are struggling. Make sure you're getting input from the people who might actually need them. And then make sure that we are talking about them widely. If you, for instance, have a really great policy on leave for people who are experiencing domestic violence in their intimate relationship, right? You have this great policy, but nobody knows it's out there. It's not really doing much good. So make sure that you are talking about those widely, because you never know who might need them. The other thing it's important to remember is one of the ways that we can support people is by being transparent with them, by actually explaining to them what's going on. This is something I saw again and again with crime victims. Everybody craved information. And certainly, I'm sure many of you have seen this through COVID. There's so many questions like, when is opening going to happen? Is everybody coming in? How is this all going to work? How's testing going to work? All of that stuff. People crave information, particularly in times of upheaval. So doing everything we can to communicate clearly, short, clear sentences, and repeatedly, over and over and over again. You may think that you have done it ad nauseum, but you really have not. This is something I will say as a parent, I learned how to be a better manager because I was a mom. I have 3 kids, and I realized that even if I had all 3 of them in front of me and I had to explain something, I had to do it 3 times, because one of them was going to be paying attention, but one was going to be zoning out and the other was going to be trying to annoy his brother, right? So one of the things I realized was I had always thought, like, well, I explained it in staff meeting, so they all know it now. They really don't. You have to say it again and again and again. All right, and then the final thing is recognize burnout. So this is one of those areas. Let me just tell you a quick story. When I was at the Justice Department, there was a man I worked with who was a prosecutor of child exploitation cases, and he was a phenomenal prosecutor. He was great in the courtroom. He was great with the victims and their families. He and I worked together on a project for a couple of years, and I really liked him. He was, hardworking, pleasant, polite. He was smart. He was a nice guy, just great. And then the project ended and a few years went by, and then we came together again on a new project. And this time he was like a different person. He was suddenly so much more sarcastic and bitter. He would fly off the handle over things that really just didn't seem like that big a deal, just like the normal, roadblocks you hit in any project would just kind of send him reeling. I mean, he was always polite to me, let me be clear, but he just really seemed to have such a shorter temper, and I was so surprised. And finally, I realized he was suffering from burnout, that he was really experiencing compassion fatigue from all of those years working on those really difficult cases. Now, I know this picture is kind of a silly one, but the reality is that compassion fatigue and secondary trauma, they are not silly, and they can creep up on us slowly over time. With this colleague, I don't know that I would have recognized what he was struggling with if I had been working with him every day. I think I only noticed it because it had been a few years since I had seen him. So I think it's especially important that we are not just watching these signs in ourselves, but also trying to make sure that we are noticing it in each other. Just check in with people. You know, hey, I noticed you seemed a little off in that meeting. Is everything okay? I just wanted to check in. Do you want to grab lunch? Would you like to get a cup of coffee? How are things going? You never know the difference just that one statement can make. And then the final one is trust. And again, this is the idea that I can trust what you say, and that you actually mean it and are going to carry through. So some of those are things like, are you being clear and consistent? Are the rules the same for everybody on this team, or do some people get different rules than others? Are the rules that are written down the actual rules? If we want to build trust, we have to be consistent in how we are applying the rules. Within that, though, try to be as flexible as you can. So I know that can seem at odds with each other. So let me just give you a quick example. Say you are in an organization where you know that you have to have coverage in the office every day, but you don't need everybody in the office every day. So you come up with a schedule and you say, okay, everybody is allowed flexibility. You are allowed to pick the days of the week that you are in the office, but then we expect you there. You really do have to be there, and there's a consequence if you're not, for instance. So make sure that everybody understands the rules, you give as much flexibility as you can within them, and then you carry out those rules. You know, if you're not going to carry out the rules, they're really kind of meaningless, right? All right, learn. And what I mean by that is, you know, we all have our own background and experience that shapes who we are, and everybody on our team has their own background and experience that shapes who they are. We don't know everything about the people that we are interacting with. I don't know, for instance, where you grew up, what your family background was like, where you went to school, your religious background. I don't know very much really about all of the incredible things that go into who you are, but I'm willing to learn. And that's the key, is we have to demonstrate humility in our interactions with others. Don't assume that you know everything about the person that you're interacting with. Be willing to ask questions. I used to work with a woman who was of a religion where they didn't celebrate holidays. And I struggled for far longer than I should have with how do I handle this issue that at the end of the year, I usually give presents to people. And I didn't know what to do. And finally, I went to her and I said, you know, I usually give presents out at the end of the year. How would you like me to handle that? And she said, well, if it's a Christmas present, I don't want that. But if it's an acknowledgement of all of my work over the year, well, that would certainly be welcome. And I thought, oh, well, that's not that hard. It was just, I had to be willing to ask the question. So that's what I would urge you to do as well. Just approach others with an understanding that you do not know their full experience and a desire to understand them. And then finally, walk the walk. And what I mean by that is be willing to model self-care and vulnerability. You know, it is one thing, for instance, to say, we have a phenomenal employee assistance program. They offer counseling. It's free, it's confidential. They're really, really great, and I suggest you check them out if you need them. It is another thing to say, we have a phenomenal EAP program here. They offer counseling. It's free, it's confidential. They were amazing for me when I really needed help, and I would advise you go check them out if you need help as well. When we show that it really is okay to get help, when we model that we ourselves need help sometimes, that we need to exercise better boundaries, that we're struggling with some issues that, you know, we're not really sure how to figure out, we demonstrate to people that it's okay for them as well to be struggling and to ask for help. All right, my friends. Got it in just under the wire. We've got a minute left of the main presentation, but 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to pause here. These are all the different ways to stay in touch with me. The top one there in particular, I want to point out is my email. So if there's anything that I covered today that brought up some question for you or something you're struggling with, please do not hesitate to get in touch. I love talking about these issues, so please feel free to email me there. You see my website and all the socials. And then finally, I do these texts on Thursdays. Every Thursday at around noon Eastern, I send out a text message, and it's about empathy, resilience, about leadership. I would love if you would join it. If you're into it, you can just text the word Blackbird to that number or scan that QR code. I should say the reason it's the word Blackbird is because that's my company name. And the reason Blackbird is my company name is because of that old Beatles song, you know, Blackbird singing in the dead of night. And what I particularly love about that song is that line, take these broken wings and learn to fly. What I love about it is that acknowledgement that when we go through a hard time, it changes us. We're not the same afterward as we were before, but we can still do incredible things. And that's really my hope for all of you. I know that I can't protect you from hard times. I know that you are struggling with things that I can't even conceive of, but I hope that through that, you know that you're not alone, and that you have people around you who are supporting you, and that you're helping to take care of some others as well. So I'm going to stop there and open up for Q&A.
Kate, what a phenomenal presentation. I'm already getting tons of messages streaming in. Thank you for a phenomenal, a clear presentation. I've got to say, I think everyone's going to be taking at least one thing away with them. Folks, we've received a number of questions. If we don't get to your question, feel free to reach out to Kate. You can see her contact information on the screen right now. And I also wanted to let you know that Kate is going to be back with us on May 23rd to talk about trauma-informed leadership, lessons for criminal justice professionals. So if that sounds like a webinar you'd like to join us for, go to the Justice Clearinghouse website. From the menu bar, select webinar schedule, and you'll find that event on May 23rd. All right, Kate, if you're ready, I'd love to see how many questions we can get through here.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, our first question is going to come all the way from Portugal. João is asking, do you think desocialization of so many people through social media might be the negative factor on mental health?
Wow, that's such a great question. You know, I will say that, first of all, I should say I haven't looked at the research on that, and I know that there are lots of people who are doing incredible research on that, and so I don't want to give a definitive answer on it, because I know that there are some really incredible takes on that. I do think that there are real challenges with social media, and in particular social media where people can be sort of anonymized. It seems to create environments where people don't recognize the humanity of the people that they're interacting with. I also will say, though, that I don't know how I would have made it through the pandemic without social media. I'm very fortunate. I have family here in the home with me, but there were lots of people that I was not able to see for years, people very, very close to me. And if it were not for social media, I don't know that I would have been able to maintain those ties. So I think it's important that we recognize both the benefits and the risks of social media, and we are really thoughtful about how we are engaging with it and keeping an eye on our own mental health, because, I can tell you this is what I do with regard to social media, but I don't know that it would help others. I think it's very, very unique what is healthy for each individual in terms of social media, and I think we just have to really prioritize taking care of ourselves in our use of social media. So thank you so much, and thanks so much for joining from Portugal. Gosh, I would love to go to Portugal. It's on my bucket list.
Me too. Me too. Absolutely. Okay, I love this next question. How can we show more empathy and connectedness if we're introverts and just aren't as talkative? Or do we just need to learn to talk more?
Oh, this is great. I'm an introvert too. I love it. So I believe that introverts are not people who don't like connecting to others. We do like connecting to others. It's just that we also have to recharge. And so that's the way that I have kind of balanced it. You know, I do a whole other session that is specifically on self-care, another training session. And one of the things I talk about is having a daily reset. I think it is particularly important for people who are introverted and maybe in professions or you know, families, for instance, where there's a lot of communication. We have to learn how to protect our own energy, and that might mean being very, very clear with people about, you know what, I'm gonna go take a break for a little bit. For instance, after this session, I love talking with all of you, but after this session, I'm gonna go lie down upstairs in a darkened room for about 30 minutes. And that I know I just have to do that to recharge. And that allows me then later when my kids get home from school, I'm able to really be present with them in a way that is authentic and real. And I'm thrilled about seeing them. I think the key is just recognizing, you know, again, we're all individuals. We need different things. And there's nothing wrong with being introverted. And we are still able to connect with people. And one of the things I really love about introverts is I find we are often really, really good listeners. We observe things that sometimes people who are more extroverted don't observe. And so it makes it sometimes even easier to provide really helpful, empathetic support and leadership when you are an introvert. So thank you for that great question.
Fantastic. Okay. Next question is from Ron. Ron wanted to know, can the idea of institutional betrayal become endemic in an organization even after a change in leadership?
Yeah, gosh, I love that question, Ron. I will tell you that you know, so I mentioned Dr. Jennifer Fried is the one who is doing this research. And I believe that one of the things she is starting to look into now is this question of um, can you rectify an institutional betrayal? So if you know that something has happened that has betrayed trust of an individual or sometimes really of an entire team or organization, are there things that you can do to mitigate that later on? And as far as I know, she doesn't have studies that show that, but she has been able to show anecdotally that there have been instances where institutional betrayal has been rectified. And in particular, a story that I heard was about a woman who was a student at the University of Oregon who was sexually assaulted by two members of the football team. And at the time she reported it, and the university leadership was very unsupportive, and I believe she ended up dropping out. She is now a public speaker who speaks nationally about this issue of sexual assault on college campuses and in football more generally. The University of Oregon, and this, you know, this was in recent years, but I think at least 15 years after her experience in college, the president of the university reached out to her and apologized for what happened to her then. He was not the same president who was there at the time, but he reached out and he issued a personal apology to her, invited her to come and meet with leadership and with the football team. She spoke at the campus, and she has said that that made a big impact on her in terms of her healing. And so, Ron, what I love about that is that idea that, you know, there can be horrible things that happened, but it doesn't mean all is lost. There are things that we can do afterward that may be able to mitigate that institutional betrayal. So yeah, thanks for that question. I love that issue.
Wonderful. All right, Kate. So we have a number of folks from the different military services. I think pretty much all of them are represented that are joining our webinars. Jennifer is wanting to know, can you share where they might be able to find out more information about sexual assault in the military?
Oh gosh. So I know there are tremendous resources on sexual assault in the military. I personally have done some training around that issue through NOVA, the National Organization of Victim Assistance. And gosh, I wouldn't even want to tell you where to go because I know that each branch has specific offices related to it. Are there folks in the audience? Are people allowed to answer questions from the audience?
Yeah,
Aaron?
actually, Andrea just shared that they can go on the DoD website. They posted the report on there.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, excellent. Thank you for answering that.
Outstanding. Okay, next question is, let me see here. I like this question. It's kind of the other side of the scale, but a really important question. Jeannie is asking, do you have any advice for being too empathetic and not holding people accountable in the long term?
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you asked that. It's an issue that I see fairly often, actually. There was a woman I was speaking with for a little while. She's the head of a nonprofit organization that does phenomenal, really, really important work. And over the pandemic, one of her top leaders basically just stopped coming to work. And she let this go on for months. And without, she would kind of check in with the woman and say, how are things? Are everything okay? But nothing was changing. And I think her take was, well, I'm trying to be supportive of this person who's struggling, who's clearly struggling. But the reality is that all of the other team members are having to pick up the slack for that person who's not doing what they have to do, right? And so it's not really empathetic. That's not really empathetic leadership. Check in with the person, absolutely. Provide support for sure. But if you are not holding people accountable for the tasks that you have said are required for this position and the ways of behaving that we have agreed, all of us, are appropriate for this workplace, if you're not willing to hold people accountable, then you're really not being fair or empathetic to everybody else in that organization, right? It is hard. I know it's hard. That they can be really, really uncomfortable conversations, but I think that clarity from the beginning about the expectations, and then having as much flexibility as you can. Like you can say, I'm willing to be flexible in these ways. This is how I can be flexible, but we have a mission that we have to meet, and there are things we cannot bend on. And for those, you have to be willing to enforce those rules and codes of behavior, or else really it is so toxic for your team. There were some really fascinating studies where they looked at team culture, and they found that teams tended to have the culture of the worst behaved member of the team. Isn't that awful? So they looked at business school students, and they put them in teams to do a task. And then they had one who was like an actor who came in, and that guy, he would come in late and he would like make fun of people. He would encourage them to cheat or to kind of like cut corners. And it was amazing how quickly he turned almost everybody else on the team to start to mimic his behaviors. So if we are not willing to call out the bad behavior, it is amazing how quickly the entire team, the entire organization can start to have that kind of toxic behavior. So it's really, really important that we are clear from the beginning about expectations, and that we're willing to hold people to them.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we can get to one, maybe two more questions here.
I'll try to be
Next one is
fast.
from next one is, how can you create or influence psychological safety up your chain? I've tried hard to create it and keep it with my team, but I find that I don't have that same psychological safety, and it can be draining.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of my favorite things, and this is where I feel like being a lawyer really helps me, because I've gotten very good at making the case. What I have found when it comes to convincing leadership that this stuff matters is you have to explain to them why it matters to them. And for them, usually it comes down to productivity, right? What they need to see is the bottom line. So how is this going to affect engagement, productivity, ethical behavior, the things that they know that they are going to be judged on. And honestly, my book, it starts with all these statistics that will just help you come in with, you kind of have to be armed from the beginning with like, hey, so one of the things I've noticed is that we are struggling in terms of psychological safety. Do you know what that is? And you can talk a little bit about the Google study. They love the Google study because all managers, think of Google as being like where they want to be, right? In terms of like really good leadership. So start with the Google study and explain what psychological safety is, and then talk about what a difference it makes in terms of teams being able to be successful on every measure. If you just Google, I wish I had the site for you, but if you just Google, Google studies psychological safety, there's an article that the New York Times did a few years ago that walks through it, and you can share that with your management. So give them the business case for it. This is how it's going to affect our successfulness, our longevity, trust in the organization, and then walk them through some of the things about how to do that. So you could say, for instance, did you know teams have the highest psychological safety where managers check in at least once a week? You know, is that something you feel like you could do? So give them first the business case, get their buy-in, and then the practical tips would be my advice.
Kate, I can't thank you enough for a phenomenal presentation. And again, I know that so many of I think we had about 850 people or 850 sign-ins for your webinar. I know that they'll agree. Any closing comments you'd like to share before we shut down for this morning?
You know what? I'm not even going to do it. I'm going to rely on the incredible Maya Angelou for closing comments because she always says it better than me. This is one of my favorite quotes, and one of the things I wanted to leave with you because of this idea. You know, we all of us, me especially, get caught up in the day-to-day of our tasks, our to-dos, all the things that we need to get done. What I would urge you to do and leave you with is this idea that the most important thing we might do in a day is not on that to-do list. It's in an interaction with somebody who really needs us. So I hope that you're able to show up for people in those moments and also to show up for yourselves. And I'm so grateful that you spent this time with me. Thank you.
Likewise. Folks, a lot of references, a lot of books, lots of links shared during the webinar today. We're going to consolidate all of those on the resource page. We'll send you a link to that resource page tomorrow. Members will be able to access the recording and so on and so forth, but everyone will be able to access those links. With that, this concludes this morning's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. Thank you everyone so much for taking the time to be here today. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your week. Bye now.